I remember several distinct times in my career when something terribly, horribly went wrong regarding data, and one of the first questions was, you got a backup of that, right? Well, in this nugget, I'd like to walk you through some steps that you and I can take so that the answer to that is yes. We not only have a backup, but we know how to apply it regarding the configuration of a Palo Alto firewall. Let's begin. Here are the exact steps that we can take to back up and restore our configuration in the event, for example, our firewall is destroyed or goes away and we need to go ahead and replace it. We're going to commit, first of all, while the current firewall is up and running. Make sure changes are committed. Save that configuration. We can export it down to, for example, Bob's PC. And then when we have the new firewall in place, we can then load it into this firewall. So it's now part of the candidate configuration. And then we can commit those changes on the new firewall. And then the configuration that we used to have on the older firewall will now be in place on the new firewall. So I'd like to walk you through those steps with a live demonstration of doing exactly that. So here in VMware Workstation, I've just barely powered up this Palo Alto firewall. And you might ask, well, Keith, how come you powered it down between nuggets? And the answer is because I did the snapshot trick with VMware. Power it off, delete the old snapshot, create a new snapshot, and then power it back on. So this is the original firewall that we've been configuring together all the way through these nuggets up to this point. And what we'll do is we'll go through the steps of saving that configuration that's currently in place on this firewall. We'll back it up locally to our local computer, and then we'll turn off this firewall and we'll deploy a new one, and we'll import the configurations that we saved from the first firewall. That'll be firewall A, and we'll apply it to firewall B. All right, so here we are in the graphical user interface for that existing Palo Alto firewall, and we are going to go over to Device, this tab on the upper top right, and then on the left we'll select Setup, and then from here we're going to go ahead and click on the Operations subtab. Now, notice up here in the top right-hand corner the commit is grayed out, which implies that any changes have already been committed. However, if we want to err on the side of caution, we could click on Commit, and it's going to say, do you want to confirm the overwrite of the running config? We'll say OK, and then it says there's no changes to commit. But just to be on the safe side, all changes are currently committed. So that's step number one. Make sure we have any candidate changes committed to the running config. Then let's go ahead and click on Save Named Configuration Snapshot. So it's basically a snapshot of the configuration that we can name. So let's go ahead and click on Save Named Configuration Snapshot. And we'll name this Original Dash Firewall. And I'm going to put a little timestamp on it too of 11:58, which is the current time in my office. I guess it's the same time out of my office if you're in the same time zone. And we'll click on OK. So now it's saved. Now the question is, where is it saved? It's saved locally on this firewall. If the whole firewall goes away, we're going to lose that as well. So our next step after saving the configuration is we want to go ahead and export the configuration. So we'll click on Export Named Configuration Snapshot. We'll use the drop down, and there's a few that I have here. And here's the one we just made, the original firewall 1158. We'll select that, and we'll click on OK. And that's going to download. So it's in my downloads folder on my local computer. And based on the browser you're using, the mileage may vary on where exactly it's going to put it. But on my browser, when I download something, it puts it in the downloads folder. So now I've got the configuration backed up on my local computer. So now if our firewall fails, we can do some basic bootstrapping of the new firewall, including the management interface address, and then simply import the configuration that we now have backed up. So let's power off the existing firewall as if it's had a failure of some type. To do that, we'll go to Device, and then there's Setup, and the subtab of Operations right here, we'll simply click on Shutdown Device. Click on Yes, and in just a few moments, that firewall is no longer running in VMware Workstation in our lab environment. So while that shuts down, I'm going to go ahead and create the second firewall. We don't want to have them both running at the same time because we don't want to have two devices on any subnet with the same exact IP address. That'll cause a conflict. So the process of creating a new virtual firewall is very much like it was when we did it originally in this series. We're going to go to File and select Open. We're going to browse to the location of that file in our file system. Here's the 6.1.0 OVA, the virtual machine OVA file for the Palo Alto firewall. We'll double click it, and I'm going to name this PAVM, and I'm going to call it new. So we'll be very clear on the title that this is the new firewall. Then I'm going to click on Browse to specify where I want to store the virtual machine files for this new virtual machine. So I've selected a folder called New PA Firewall on the X drive, and we'll click on Import. So now we have this firewall. I'm going to drag it up and put it in my Palo Alto folder just for organization purposes. And we need to edit this because it doesn't have enough interfaces. Just like when we originally deployed the firewall, it had 2 interfaces by default. We need to add some more to this one as well. So with the new firewall selected, we'll click on Edit. So from here, we'll click on Add, and we'll click on Network Adapter, click on Next. If there's any user account control messages that come up, we simply accept those. And because we know that the next 3 interfaces need to be in VMnet 1, 2, and 3 respectively, let's just do it right now and save that extra step. So we'll put the first new adapter in VMnet 1, click on Finish. We'll click on Add again. We'll grab another network adapter next, and we'll put them in VMnet 2, click on Finish, Add, and for our final adapter, network adapter, we'll click on Next and put them in VMnet 3, click on Finish, click on OK, and then I'm going to open it one more time just to make sure that I've got 5 interfaces. The first 2 are bridged, and the 3rd, 4th, and 5th ones are in VMnet 1, 2, and 3 respectively. That looks great. The other thing that I almost forgot to do, but we definitely don't want to forget to do it in our lab environments, is we need to edit the VMX file for that virtual machine because it's very likely it put the E1000 network adapter types as opposed to the VMX Net3. So I'll click OK here, and then we'll use Explorer to go find this file right here in the file system so we can edit it with Notepad. So there's the file.vmx. We're going to right click and say I want to edit this, or open it with rather, Notepad. And I'm going to go down and grab the VMX3 with the quotes here, right click, copy that, and go down to anywhere where it says E1000 and replace that. So make sure you just follow the quotes. So quote, the name, end quote. If you have an extra quote in there, or if you have a typo, that's not going to be good. So now that we made the change to those last 3 interfaces, let's click on File, we'll save it, and then we'll go ahead and select this virtual machine, and we'll power it up. And then through the magic of editing, I'm going to allow this 3 to 5 minutes to fully bake, and then we'll together set up a base IP address for the management, just like we did previously. And we're going to use the same address of .222 on the 192.168.1 subnet, because this is going to be replacing the previous firewall that we had. Okay, doke, it's been a few minutes. Let's go ahead and do a login as admin with a password of admin. It's still set up as admin because this is the new Palo Alto with the default passwords. So now we're in operational mode. Let's go into configuration mode by typing in configure, pressing enter. And let's use the command set, device config, system, IP-address, and then we'll put in the IP address of 192.168.1.222, keyword of netmask, with the mask of 255.255.255.0. That wrapped at the end, no problem. And then we'll commit that with the command commit, press enter. And in a few seconds, we should have our management interface up and active, so we could actually log into it with the GUI and do an import of that configuration that we previously exported, commit that to the running config, and poof, we should be in business. So we're going to log into this new firewall with the default passwords on this new firewall of admin and password of admin. We'll press enter. And we get a warning saying we should probably change that. Thank you very much. Here's the dashboard. And what we want to do is we want to use the device tab over here on the top right. And under setup on the left, we'll select that. And we'll go to the operations sub-tab right here. From here, we want to import. We want to import that named configuration. So we'll click on import named configuration snapshot. There's a link that allows us to browse our local file system. So we'll click on browse. And I browse to the downloads folder on my computer. I selected the original -FW-11-58. So we click on OK. It's going to go ahead and copy that. Now that's sitting on the local file system of this new Palo Alto firewall. So we'll click on close. So our next step is to load that named configuration that now has locally on the file system. So we'll select load named configuration snapshot. We'll use the drop down arrow. Here we have the original -FW-1158. We'll select that and then click on OK. So now it's loaded that configuration as the candidate configuration. Just as if we'd manually gone in and made all those changes, those are all part of the candidate configuration, the configuration that is waiting to join the party in running config as soon as we click on commit. So we'll close this dialog window. And we can see that the commit hyperlink up here is not faded out, which implies that there's some pending changes in the candidate configuration that if we click on commit, we can go ahead and apply. So we'll click on commit. It says doing a commit will overwrite the running config. And before we click on OK, I'd also like to show you what the preview changes does. So we'll click on preview changes. We can scroll through it. I'm going to say 10 and I'll click on OK, and that's going to open up a pop-up window. So if you have a pop-up blocker, you might want to pay attention to that. If it's not coming up, perhaps the pop-up blocker is stopping it. So it's showing us the differences currently between the running configuration and the candidate configuration. Looks fantastic. I'm going to close that pop-up window and we're going to click on OK to apply those changes. So now that commit's done, let's go ahead and click on close. And now if we go to policies and we go to security, we should have our security policies, which we do. One for users going to the internet, one for access from the internet to our web server. We have our NAT policies in place as well. We have our address objects down here that we applied as part of our configuration earlier in these nuggets. And we could also test this. So if we wanted to test this from a device on the inside, for example, just verifying that we could ping to the outside world, because ping is currently allowed as part of our security policy. From the inside to the outside, let me just verify that for a moment. So sure enough, right here in our in to out policy, we have DNS, ping, SSL, and web browsing allowed. So if we were to bring up a client, and I think what I'd like to do is just really quickly bring up a GNS3 virtual PC. I'm not even going to save this project. I'm just going to drag out a cloud. We've done this previously. This is a little bit of a review. I'm going to drag out a virtual PC simulator PC. I'll drag out a generic switch. And we'll right click on the cloud to configure it to represent VMnet1, which represents the 10.11 subnet, the inside network. So now with this cloud representing the VMnet1 interface on VMware Workstation, we'll click on OK, and we'll put some connections in place from the PC to the switch, from the switch to the cloud, which represents VMnet1, which is the 10.11 subnet. And then we'll start our topology by clicking on the Go icon. We'll open up our console to PC1, and here at PC1, let's do an IP address. And let's give the IP address of 10.1.1.25 with a 24-bit mask with a default gateway of 10.1.1.250, which is the inside interface that's associated with the inside zone. And it doesn't like the word address, so I need to just put in IP, and then the actual IP address. There we go. And we'll also give it a DNS server. So IP, DNS, and we'll give it 8.8.8.8. That looks great. And then let's try a ping out to www.google.com. And if that works, that would also prove that DNS is working, if the name resolution worked, and also that ICMP is working. It didn't work, but it could have been a timeout due to an initial ARP request that didn't quite get finished or something like that. Let's go ahead and do it one more time. Oh, there we go. I'm glad. That saves us a bunch of troubleshooting, because we would have gone back and said, okay, where did this go wrong? We could also test this by putting our web server back up on that DMZ and testing from the outside just to verify we had reachability over to that web server. In this nugget, we've looked at some steps that we can take to back up an existing configuration and then apply it to a new firewall that's going to be replacing the older one. I appreciate you joining me for the nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.